man, I almost just died. I was taking a sip of the Lagavulin and hiccuped at the same time.
Woo!
That is not something you want in your lungs.
Get that corona right out of there. I'm thinking a bowl of gummy bears really wasn't the right snack choice for right now.
I'm going to eat some hard pretzels, so.
Oh, man. I'm trying to think of what the... Oh, it was the Jolly Ranchers. Did you guys ever have the competition that you just bite down real hard on it until your teeth basically fuse to it?
Yeah.
And then...
Rip it open.
Oh, man. Yep.
Extract a couple of teeth. It works for little kids. Or like a bit of honey bar will do that.
I don't remember what the rules were, but we had a whole competition system, brackets and everything in elementary school.
All right. So what we read, James, you want to give us an intro on this? We'll just edit it together, put it all in post.
Just make me sound good, Ryan. Make me sound good.
No promises.
No problem. No, wait, was that no problem or no promises? I can't. I didn't catch that. So we read the very first story ever of Conan, also sometimes known as Conan the Barbarian. The very first story is also the last story chronologically, his life based on a true story, where he is the king.
A true story made up entirely of made-up events?
Entirely made up events and locations and people.
No, it's based on France.
Is it based on France?
Yeah.
Hyperion is a very French word.
Aquilonia is supposedly somewhere in France. At least that's what the Wikipedia has said.
But he's the king. He's not happy as king. He just wants to drink and kill people. And I think he makes mention of wenches somewhere in there as well.
Yeah, I was going to say there was definitely some pillaging that he was missing too.
I don't remember if any of the plebes, the peasants, how they felt about Conan. I assume based on the story that they liked him, but the other governmental powers did not.
Well, not at this point, because there's the comment that Ronaldo, was that the
poet or something? Yeah.
Yeah, the minstrel or whatever, he had swayed the people away from Conan, so they were, Ronaldo, so they were missing. And
Conan complained about the fickleness of the people, that you'd think they would be a little more appreciative of.
Yeah, he's like, they're longing for that king who is a total dick to them.
Right. So a number of I always just categorize them as politicians, but I'm not sure what the governmental structure was there at that kingdom. The governmental organization of it all decided to enlist some assassins, if I remember that correctly. And eventually some like demon comes after him. And he gets a special sword to stop said demon.
Well, it was his sword, and then Epimetheus, which I don't know about you, but his name totally made me think of the Lego movie with Vitruvius. But
Epimetheus is my middle name.
Really? That's convenient. Epimetheus, the ancient sage whose tomb is some sort of religious mystery, because the priest dude gets super uptight when Conan starts describing Epimetheus' tomb. Epimetheus comes to Conan in a vision and places the phoenix mark on his sword, and that's how he defeats the shadow demon. But yeah, it was Dion, I think, was the bad guy, the leader of the conspiracy to replace Conan, and then he had gotten that Ascalante guy who had the slave named Thoth, and that's not with a lisp. And Thoth had been in some sort of super powerful evil sorcerer dude in some Egypt-like place.
Mm-hmm.
And he had one of the 9 rings of power gifted to mortal men.
That's certainly what it seemed like.
Yeah.
Yeah, Thothamon. He's from Stygia.
Yeah. So he got that ring stolen, and when the ring was stolen, then he basically went into hiding because he had made a bunch of enemies by using his power to be a jerk. And then it turns out when you don't have power, then maybe you shouldn't be a jerk. And so he hid, and then he was captured as a slave. And so then in the course of things, he finds out that this other conspirator has the ring. So he murders said conspirator and takes the ring, and then starts doing his evil voodoo chant and summons some weird sort of shadow demon bat dog thing is kind of how I pictured it. And so, yeah, they have bribed the captain of the guard to leave Conan unguarded at night so they can break in and kill him. Conan, kind of because of the vision, knows that something's up. So when he wakes up from the vision, he starts putting on his armor. So he's all prepared when they come in. And then he's got his special sword, and then it breaks almost immediately, which actually kind of took me by surprise because there's a whole bunch of this story that was very obviously coming.
How about that sword?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and then the sword just immediately breaks. So he's fighting one of the guys whose name is escaping me at the moment. It might have been the Dion dude. I don't know.
The Bard?
No, because I think the Bard went down pretty easy because he was just a Bard. And so then the shadow monster comes in and just totally slaughters the other guy. And I feel like Conan probably would have gotten away without having to fight the shadow demon, except that he was a barbarian. And so he started fighting the shadow demon.
Mm-hmm.
Then he took like the shards of, like there was just a little bit of his sword left, and he stabbed the shadow demon in its shadow area, and it like melted into the floor. And then everybody rushed in, and he started talking about the vision he had of Epimetheus's tomb.
Mm-hmm.
And the high priest got super angsty, then wanted to see the sword, and they saw like the phoenix mark on it, and that's kind of how it ended.
Was one of the conspirators, was it the guy that was in Conan's chambers early in the book? I thought when the crowd rushed in, there was somebody that he recognized.
Well, he recognized a few of the people. Like he recognized Ronaldo was there because they were mentioning Ronaldo
right
back in chapter 2 when he was saying that the real power in the kingdom lies with the
storyteller.
Yeah, that's he says it was Prospero who he was talking to in his chambers at the beginning. He says, "No, Prospero, he's beyond my reach. A great poet is greater than the king. His songs are mightier than my scepter."
Oh, that's right.
And thus was the inspiration for Game of Thrones season 7 or 8, whatever the last season number was that I've chosen to forgotten.
It was a decent book. The themes that I took away from the book definitely was that Conan had high regard for the bard or the storyteller.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing was the Escalante, the Thothamon's slave master. He went down like a sack once the guy saw the ring, just like bludgeoned him, took his ring away, and then started calling demons out.
As you do.
Well, yeah, not a lot of foreplay with that guy, I'll tell you.
It was interesting the amount of emotion that the Thoth guy, the slave,
mm-hmm.
Like it was really visceral, and when he realized that the ring was right there, like it was like,
yeah, there was
you knew that now, and you felt it.
There was no fact checking. It was just like, oh, you have a ring, you say, dead. Like, part of me was like, wouldn't it be fantastic if he just murders this dude, and then the guy's like, at his dying breath was, yeah, but I pawned it for. It's gone. He's got no clue now where it's gone.
Oh, it's for some weed money.
Yeah.
Damn it!
Do you have the receipt?
The way he acted with that ring was a lot like Gollum with the ring in Lord of the Rings.
Well, that and the sword breaking and him using kind of the
shards,
the stub, the shards of it, reminded me of Narsil. For those not as familiar with the Lord of the Rings world, that's when the sword of, was it Anduril, was broken, and it's then the shards are used to cut the ring off of Sauron's hand.
I got a question for you, Brian.
Mm-hmm.
You were able to, and have been able to, recall a lot of the names, and they're strange names. Do you take notes to help you remember?
I've got a couple of notes of these names.
Okay.
The Lord of the Rings stuff,
Either way,
I'm pulling from like a 20-year-old memory, so I may be off on those names, but I jotted names down just in my little pocket notebook.
There were some really strange names in this book for sure.
The names bugged me so much. So much. Because they were just all over the place. There was no unifying factor. And these stories are supposed to be set like thousands of years BC. And half of these names are from languages that won't come around for like 3,000 years.
Right. And they all speak a common language, obviously, even though it's all across the world.
Mm-hmm.
And what was the time period? They said it was before the fall of, what's the name of that?
Numenor in the West?
No,
wait. That's, sorry.
Wait,
Lord of the Rings again.
Atlantis, wasn't it? It was before the fall of Atlantis.
Yeah, I think they mentioned Atlantis. Yeah, it's all set in kind of this weird...
Like way early prehistory before there was a big cataclysm, wiped out everybody and push reset. Alt deleted the whole thing.
As you do.
It's interesting, because when you name things in your fictional stories or whatever, you're trying to evoke a feeling, like this feels like an elvish language. It feels like believability is much more important than realism. And we're definitely, the historical context of this story is beyond us is the right word, but it's outside of our context. I really felt like it was trying to evoke like a biblical feel in its naming conventions and in style and dress. I don't know what you guys thought.
Some of the names seemed vaguely familiar of which geographic areas he was talking about. Like he was describing the northern countries. Like
no, you felt like it was kind of a Viking Nordic locale. I didn't get that at all. I pictured like desert Middle East type of thing.
Yeah, there were several. He was talking about the northern territories where nobody was happy and it was dark and cold and windy and rainy all the time and everybody fought and drank all the time.
Yeah, and I think that area is supposed to be, especially because they mentioned Asgard and Vanaheim.
Oh, right.
To the northwest of Samaria. So it's like Samaria is like maybe northern Germany or Poland, and then you've got Asgard and Vanaheim. You're obviously up in Scandinavia there, which kind of puts this in Central Europe, which I think is why the Wikipedias were saying that it was probably somewhere France-ish.
Interesting.
But I mean, I like languages, and so the names kind of bugged me that way. But at the same time, like you're saying, the names are meant to kind of evoke, and with a story this short, there's definitely some shorthand going on with the naming. You know, having Conan's kind of advisor and companion be named Prospero, it kind of gives you more of a feel for the character that would have taken a lot more prose to flesh out.
When I hear Samaria, for some reason, I do picture like a Middle Eastern country.
Well, there's Samaria, which is from northern Israel. When Israel split in two, there was Judah and then Israel, and Israel then later became Samaria. So that's like this good Samaritan is the person from Samaria. But this is Samaria or something, which is spelled completely different.
Yeah, Cimmeria.
Yeah.
Oh, maybe that's why I read that and totally pronounced that differently in my mind. There's a C there. It's Chimeria.
In Robert E. Howard's mythos, one of the lands is Aranistan.
Wow.
Excellent.
Like that's
it's a little on the nose.
Yep. Yeah, Samaria, according to his descriptions, is like the Celtic Islands, Britain, Scotland.
Oh, okay.
Interesting. I didn't see that at all.
Yeah, so I was looking at that, read northwest, and then immediately my mind went northeast with it instead, which is where I got the Germany-Poland thing. But yeah, that makes sense, that having the barbarian be Celtic.
Well, the barbarians in history were the Germanic tribes, so I can see where you're going with that. Yeah.
Well, that's where we get the word barbarian from, is the Romans thought that the Germanic languages sounded like sheep, so they called them barbar.
Well, that'll start a war every time. So a little background on Robert E. Howard. He was born in Texas in 1906, which puts him pre-World War One.
Was he a soldier in World War One?
He would have been too young for that.
I mean, that didn't stop a lot of people in World War One.
Right.
But if he was American, we tended to enter those things a little late. So
Yeah.
one of the things that I was wondering was, this is pretty early with modern fantasy.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was wondering, because I know that one of the main influences for pretty much all modern fantasy is this book by Mr. Oh, I can't remember the dude's name now. It's called Well at the World's End. And I know that it influenced pretty heavily Tolkien and Lewis, because it had like a King Gandalf and a King Peter. There was a sword named Silverfax, not Shadowfax.
Wow.
So I did a little bit of Googling to see if anybody was saying that William Morris is the name of the author. But I did a little bit of Googling to see if anybody was saying that Robert Howard was influenced by this Well at the World's End book. This is a whole thing to say that was a total red herring, because nobody's saying that. And not having read any more Conan than just this one story,
you're the first to say it,
or the other book. Yeah,
You heard it here first.
so speaking from a place of complete ignorance, I came up with that idea, and clearly that's where it needs to stay.
I guess it could have been King Arthur stories.
Yeah, I mean, there's fantasy going all the way back.
Right.
You have, but kind of the modern sort of sword and sorcery and high fantasy type stories.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it seems that he didn't. No one else was saying that he had been influenced by that. And having not read that story, I don't have anything to go on other than I know that was an influence for a lot of fantasy writers, and it was written in 1880s, 1890s.
I'm on some fandom wiki, which is by no means authoritative, especially as it has zero sources.
Those are the best kind.
But
those are the ones that are either so far out there that they're just fun, or so right that it's scary.
They talk about Robert E. Howard's correspondence with H.P. Lovecraft. Mm-hmm. A lot of the supernatural elements are shared between those stories. And then they talk a lot about popular interest in the time of ideas around evolution and social Darwinism, like what makes Conan the ideal man type of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And then his Conan's explicit opinions around civilization. And in one book, in Queen of the Black Coast, Conan says, "Let teachers and priests and philosophers brood over questions of reality and illusion. I know this: if life is an illusion, then I am no less an illusion, and being thus the illusion is real to me. I live, I burn with life, I love, I slay, and I am content." Which is, I think, one of the most surprising things to me about the Conan stories is how explicit they are in the commentary on life. It's not just him running around kicking ass, being cool. Like he is explicit. Like Robert Howard is explicitly talking about like what it means to be a human, how people should live, how people could ideally live.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's definitely some practical philosophy that he seems to be working out there.
Because I think when we think of, especially we think of like Dungeons and Dragons, Barbarians, even like Arnold Schwarzenegger, Conan
Lander.
movies.
Sorry, that was the name of my barbarian character that I played. I've been trying to think of it for like a week, and I couldn't think of it, and it just came. Sorry, I totally interrupted and derailed you. Continue.
No, it's all right. We think of them being dumb. Like, I mean, like they're almost like a parody of themselves. Like,
yeah, like the Tick superhero
Mm-hmm.
is a barbarian.
Yeah,
and that's
right,
exactly how he's lovable, but he is dumb.
They're never idealized. They're never like, oh yeah, this is how, humanity should be. They're always like, haha, look at that big muscle-bound idiot.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe that big muscle-bound idiot is like necessary for their specific task, but they're never portrayed in the light of this guy's got it figured out.
It's in a way, the Conan is almost set up here like a foil to the kind of philosopher king of King Arthur.
Oh, yeah.
Where, you've got this guy and there's some court intrigue, but he doesn't care. He just is missing the days when he used to bash heads in.
Mm-hmm.
And so he gets that vision and he's just like, sweet, I'm putting on my armor.
So he's portrayed here, and he's definitely portrayed in the other stories as well, as being the ideal man. But at the same time, this story basically opens with him as a failed king. He has failed as king.
Mm-hmm.
Is that the case? Is the story saying that's not his fault? It's everybody else's fault for not being more like him? Or
well, I almost took it.
I don't know.
To me, it seemed almost. It seemed almost that he wasn't so much a failure as a victim of the success, that the people had it so good that they started nitpicking and looking back at, the one or two things that they liked better before, but that I don't know. I didn't take it as, he's a complete failure as a king. He seemed to be doing okay, but he didn't enjoy it, and the people were bored from a prolonged period of peace.
Right. He mentioned that the people were longing for the bad king that he took over for. And that was one of the bard's things, was he was singing about Conan being a failure, but the people have never had it so good. And they had it so good that they have time to complain about nothing.
King Numedides? Numdides.
Numdides. All right.
I like it.
That's my second name.
Yeah. Epimetheus Numdides.
I got to keep a running gag going. That's my band name in college.
What did you say your weird name was, James?
I don't even remember anymore.
Epimetheus, I think is what it was.
Epimetheus, yeah.
Yeah. Episiotomy.
Oh, right. So wrap up on the story. Robert E. Howard, the story is The Phoenix on the Sword. It was an early work by this guy. He actually, unfortunately, ended his life early through some strange suicide pact with his father, but his father was unaware of the suicide pact, which is an interesting story on its own. I'd suggest checking that out.
It's really quite sad. I can't help but feel for his dad that his son saying some weird things because it was basically his mother was dying of cancer or something, and he seemed to have said something probably along the lines of life's not going to be worth living when she's not around anymore, or something. But he seemed to have taken from his dad's response that they had formed a suicide pact, and his dad just, I guess, thought it was a normal thing that you say during grieving. But yeah, his mom died, and he walked out in the parking lot, sat down in his car, and shot himself in the head.
Spontaneous. Woo.
Yeah. So his dad loses his wife and his son in the space of a half hour.
In the space of a city block.
Yeah.
Dang. Yeah, that's too bad.
Yeah. So
right as his career was taking off, really, he was starting to pick up steam and starting to get some notoriety with these characters, because Conan really didn't pick up much mainstream approval until after the writer was already gone.
And wasn't he in his early 30s too?
Yeah, I think he was 30 years old.
Man.
Wild.
Yeah, burn bright. Burn out too soon. That's too bad.
Yeah. It's really, really sad.
So on the gentleman's scale, I would call this, let's see, how many mustache twists are we calling this? On a scale of 1 twist to 4 twists, I would give this let's say 3 twists.
I feel pretty confident in rating it a Nicolas Cage.
Okay. Is that a Con Air Nicolas Cage or a Leaving Las Vegas Nicolas Cage?
It's a Raising Arizona Nicolas Cage.
It's a high mark.
I mean, I always roll with a Family Man Nicolas Cage. Favorite Nicolas Cages.
All right,
Magician's Apprentice.
There you go.
Or do we not talk about that one?
That's a rough Nicolas Cage right there. All right, so that was The Phoenix on the Sword by Robert E. Howard.
Yeah, to check your notes.
Yep, I did.
I heard that. Perfect. There's going to be a whole bunch of hot garbage at the beginning of this take.
I can see the waveform of my laugh. I don't like it.
So just minimize the window.
I can't stop staring at it.
Hey, this is Brian from The Gentleman Technologist. This isn't a full episode. I just wanted to drop a quick correction into your ear holes, your ear orifices. Orifices? Oh, you know what? That was awful. But we're moving on. We're committed now. We at The Gentleman Technologist thrive on conjecture and heresy. Wait, what? I think Ryan meant hearsay, but can't spell. Or maybe he did mean heresy. Anyway, we wanted to be a trusted source of snark and useless facts. But the fact is we goofed. I goofed. I got almost all of the facts surrounding Robert E. Howard's unfortunate and untimely death wrong. In the show notes, I've dropped a link to what really happened. If you were planning on using the story of his death that I told in our Phoenix on the Sword episode as an amusing anecdote at your next Zoom cocktail party, or maybe to impress that girl or guy, you know the one I'm talking about, the next time you FaceTime, maybe don't, because it's not what happened. Anyway, I hope you're staying safe and sane out there in this weird COVID-19 lockdown. And if you're listening to this from the future after the quarantine, then congratulations. You presumably made it through safe and sane. Well done.